Have you ever met someone who just gets people? You know the type. They walk into a room and within a few minutes they seem to understand who everyone is and what they need. They can tell when someone is lying. They know when a colleague is frustrated before that person even opens their mouth. They seem to read the mood of a conversation like a seasoned sailor reads the wind, effortlessly and almost always correctly. It can feel like a superpower, and honestly, most of us have wished we had it. Here's the thing though, it isn't magic. It isn't a gift you're either born with or not. Reading people is a skill, and like any skill, it can be learned, practiced, and mastered. That's exactly what Patrick King's book, Read People Like a Book, is about. It's a practical, psychology-backed guide to understanding why people do what they do. Their emotions, their motivations, their body language, their hidden fears, and how you can use that understanding to communicate better, connect more deeply, and navigate the world with far more confidence. Today, we're going to walk through the key ideas of this book together. Think of this as a conversation between you and me. No textbook jargon, no complicated theories. Just clear, useful insight you can start applying today. Let's dive in. Before we learn how to read people, we need to confront a slightly uncomfortable truth. Most of us are already doing it, and doing it badly. The problem isn't that we're not observant. The problem is that we're confidently wrong. We jump to conclusions based on a single look, a single moment, or a single behavior, and then we stop observing. We think we've figured someone out and we move on. Meanwhile, the full, complex, living person standing right in front of us goes completely unseen. There are a few specific traps we fall into. The first one is what psychologists call confirmation bias. Once we form an impression of someone, we start collecting evidence that confirms it. If you've decided someone is arrogant, you'll notice every time they interrupt, and you'll barely register the moments when they listen thoughtfully. The picture you build of a person becomes a highlight reel, not the full story. The second trap is reading a single sign in isolation. Maybe you saw a listicle online, 5 body language signs someone is lying. So the next time you're in a conversation and someone avoids your eyes, you think, aha, liar. But hold on, were they distracted? Embarrassed about something unrelated? Naturally shy? One signal on its own means almost nothing. You need clusters of signals, patterns over time to make any kind of reliable judgment. The third trap is ignoring context. Context is everything. Someone fidgeting during a conversation at a job interview is not the same as someone fidgeting while confessing something to a friend. The setting, the relationship, the emotional climate, all of it shapes how behavior should be interpreted. And here's a fourth trap that King spends time on, and it's a particularly sneaky one. Failing to establish a baseline. Let's say you're talking to someone and they're very friendly. Lots of eye contact, warm smiles, leaning in close. You think, wow, they must really like me. But what if that's just how they are with everyone? Without knowing their baseline, their normal, you can't accurately interpret the signals they're sending. There's one more trap, and it might be the most important of all. Yourself. Your own biases, fears, past experiences, and unresolved emotions color everything you see in other people. If you were recently betrayed, you might see betrayal everywhere. If you grew up around anger, you might misread someone's passion as aggression. The best people readers in the world understand this about themselves. They've done the hard work of knowing their own blind spots before they start trying to see everyone else clearly. The bottom line is this: great people reading isn't about gut feelings. It's about gathering good data, staying humble about what you don't know, and building a picture slowly and thoughtfully, the way a detective builds a case. Now we get to the good stuff. If you want to truly understand another person, you have to understand what drives them. Not just what they're saying, not just what they're doing, but why. What engine is running beneath the surface? King explores motivation through 3 powerful lenses. The hidden self, Carl Jung's shadow. The first one might surprise you because it comes from deep psychology. Swiss psychologist Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, the part of ourselves we hide, deny, and push away. Think of it this way. We all present a conscious version of ourselves to the world. We are polite, put together, reasonable. But there's another part of us, a part filled with the feelings we've been told are unacceptable, our anger, our envy, our fear, our shame. We don't get rid of those feelings by suppressing them. They go underground, and then, like a beach ball you're trying to hold underwater, they eventually pop back up, often in ways we don't recognize. Here's where it gets useful for reading people. When someone is hypercritical of others, they often can't tolerate those same flaws in themselves. When someone is obsessively moralistic, look carefully. Their shadow may contain exactly the impulses they're so desperate to condemn in others. The classic bully who makes others feel small is almost always someone who, deep down, feels very small themselves. Jung also talked about shadow projection, when we unconsciously take our own unacknowledged feelings and stick them onto other people. If someone keeps accusing you of being selfish, take a step back. Is it possible they're the one wrestling with selfishness? This isn't about playing amateur psychologist or calling people out. It's about having compassion. When you can see the hidden wound beneath someone's difficult behavior, you stop reacting to the surface and start responding to the whole person. That changes everything. Related to this is the concept of the inner child. Most of our deepest patterns were formed in childhood, the ways we learned to get love, to protect ourselves, to handle disappointment. Sometimes when an adult in your life throws a disproportionate tantrum, refuses to take responsibility, or becomes suddenly clingy and emotional, what you're actually seeing is their inner child running the show. Knowing this doesn't excuse the behavior, but it completely reframes how you respond to it. The pleasure-pain principle. The second great motivator is much simpler, almost embarrassingly simple, in fact. Sigmund Freud described it as the pleasure principle, and it goes like this. Every single thing a human being does is motivated by either the desire to gain pleasure or the desire to avoid pain. Every single thing, no exceptions. You get up for work because you want the pleasure of a paycheck and you want to avoid the pain of losing your job. You scroll through your phone at 11 at night because it feels good and avoids the mild discomfort of quiet boredom. Even acts of sacrifice, giving to charity, helping a friend in crisis, carry an emotional payoff of meaning or connection. King points out a few important nuances here. First, we work harder to avoid pain than to gain pleasure. If you've ever noticed how much more upsetting it is to lose $20 than it is satisfying to find $20, you've experienced this asymmetry firsthand. Pain avoidance is a more powerful driver than pleasure seeking. Second, it's not actual pleasure and pain that drive us, it's our perception of pleasure and pain. We avoid things that we imagine will be painful, even if we've never experienced them. We chase things that we believe will make us happy, even if they never actually do. This is why so many people make decisions that seem completely irrational from the outside. They're not irrational. They're operating on a set of inner predictions that may simply be inaccurate. Third, emotion beats logic every time. You can know perfectly well that staying up until midnight will make you feel awful tomorrow. You do it anyway. The emotional pull of the present moment always has home advantage over the cold calculations of future consequences. The practical takeaway here is this. When you're trying to understand why someone is behaving in a puzzling way, ask yourself, what pain are they avoiding? What pleasure are they moving toward? The answer is usually hiding right there in plain sight. Maslow's pyramid of needs. The third motivational framework King explores is Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs, the pyramid you've probably seen in a high school classroom. Here's the basic idea. Human beings have needs arranged in a hierarchy. The most fundamental needs are at the bottom: food, water, shelter, physical safety. Once those are met, we move up to the next level, belonging and love. Once we feel loved and connected, we seek self-esteem, confidence, achievement, the feeling that we matter. And at the very top of the pyramid is self-actualization, the drive to live a meaningful life, to grow, to contribute something to the world beyond ourselves. Here's why this matters for reading people. Where someone is on this pyramid tells you almost everything about what motivates them right now. A person who is struggling financially is not going to be moved by appeals to personal growth or creativity. They're in survival mode. A person who is lonely and disconnected doesn't need a promotion, they need belonging. A person who has achieved real material stability in deep relationships might suddenly seem restless, searching for something more. And that's their drive towards self-actualization steering. When you understand which level of the pyramid someone is operating from, you understand what they need from you, from relationships, from work, from life. It's one of the most compassionate and useful lenses you can apply to another human being. There's one more motivational force worth its own discussion, and it's one of the most powerful of all: the ego's need to protect itself. Nobody likes to be wrong. Nobody wants to feel stupid, incompetent, weak, or morally compromised. And so, without even realizing it, our minds construct elaborate systems to protect us from those feelings. These are called defense mechanisms, and once you start spotting them, you'll see them everywhere, including in yourself. Denial is the most straightforward, simply refusing to accept reality. The partner who won't acknowledge the relationship is falling apart, the employee who dismisses every piece of critical feedback. When someone is in denial, reality is simply too threatening to face, so they eliminate it. Rationalization is what we might call the excuse factory. The behavior stays, but it gets covered in a layer of justification. I didn't get the promotion because the boss has always had it in for me. The reason I missed the deadline wasn't my fault. There was too much on my plate. Rationalization keeps the ego safe by shifting responsibility outward. Projection is when we take the feelings we can't bear to own and place them onto others. The man who is unfaithful in his marriage and suddenly becomes paranoid that his partner is cheating. The person who harbors deep jealousy but accuses everyone else of being envious. When you sense that someone's accusation of you feels strangely personal or oddly irrelevant to the situation, projection may be at work. Displacement is when the feeling is real but gets redirected somewhere safer. You can't yell at your boss, so you come home and snap at your family. The target changes, the emotion doesn't. Sublimation is actually a healthier version of this, channeling a difficult emotion into something constructive. A person who's heartbroken throws themselves into running. Someone who's furious turns to creative writing. The feeling is real, the outlet is just more socially acceptable. Understanding defense mechanisms doesn't give you license to call people out or diagnose them. It gives you insight, the ability to see beneath behavior to the emotional wound underneath. That's not a tool for manipulation. It's a tool for compassion. Now we come to what most people think of when they hear reading people, body language and facial expressions. Here's a key fact. Research suggests that only about 7% of human communication happens through our actual words. Around 38% comes through tone of voice, and a full 55% comes through body language. This means that in any conversation, the words being spoken are almost the least informative part of what's happening. The face never lies. In the 1960s and 70s, psychologist Paul Ekman made a remarkable discovery. There are certain facial expressions that appear to be universal across all human cultures. Someone in Japan and someone in rural Brazil, with no cultural overlap whatsoever, will show the same tiny muscle movements when they experience happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, or surprise. These involuntary flashes, lasting as little as 1/30th of a second, are called micro-expressions. And they're almost impossible to fake or suppress because they're controlled by a different part of the brain than the expressions we consciously choose to display. Happiness shows in lifted cheeks, crow's feet around the eyes, and the corners of the mouth pulled upward and back, what we'd recognize as a real smile versus a polite social smile. Fear lifts the eyebrows and opens the eyes wide, with the mouth tensed slightly open. Anger lowers and tightens the eyebrows, narrows the eyes, and sets the jaw. Sadness pulls the outer corners of the eyes and mouth downward and can cause a distinctive triangle shape in the eyebrows. Disgust wrinkles the nose and upper lip as if encountering a bad smell. The key skill is learning to notice when someone's words and their face are telling different stories. If someone is calmly reassuring you, but you catch a flash of fear across their expression, that's information. If someone is enthusiastically agreeing with you, but you see a microsecond of disgust, pay attention. Now, a very important caveat: micro-expressions alone prove nothing. They indicate an emotional state, but not always the one you think. What reads as fear might be nervousness, not guilt. What reads as disgust might be discomfort about something totally unrelated to you. Always interpret facial cues in the context of the whole situation. Body language. The big picture. Beyond the face, the entire body is a constant broadcast of internal states. Open body language, uncrossed arms, feet pointing toward you, relaxed posture, facing you directly, generally signals engagement, comfort, and openness. Closed body language, crossed arms or legs, a body angled away, arms held close to the torso, tends to signal discomfort, defensiveness, or the desire to disengage. Crossed arms get a lot of attention, but be careful here. Sometimes people cross their arms simply because they're cold, or because they're comfortable that way. Context, again, is everything. Watch for mirroring. When someone unconsciously copies your posture, gestures, or speech pace, this is a deeply reliable sign of rapport and connection. When people like each other, their bodies start to synchronize without either person realizing it. Proximity tells you a lot. People naturally move closer to those they like and feel safe with, and put distance between themselves and people or situations that make them uncomfortable. Notice when someone steps back in a conversation. What happened in that moment? Genuine smiles involve the eyes. The muscles around the eye corners contract, causing those little crinkles. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes is almost certainly social or performative. And finally, touch. People who feel a genuine connection touch more. A hand on the arm, a friendly shoulder pat, a lingering handshake. The absence of any touch or flinching away from it tells a different story. Reading in clusters. The single most important principle in body language is this: never read one signal alone. Think of each word as a word. A word out of context can mean almost anything, but a sentence, a cluster of words together, tells you something. When you see someone crossing their arms, looking away, leaning back and speaking in shorter sentences, that is a cluster that means something. Any single one of those signals could be noise. All of them together is a message. Always be looking for the pattern, not the single data point. That's how you read a person the way a detective reads a crime scene, with patience, attention, and an open mind. Beyond the moment-to-moment body language and situational motivations, people also have deep, relatively stable patterns in how they experience the world and relate to others. Understanding personality gives you a map, not a cage, for understanding someone. King walks through several personality frameworks. The most scientifically supported is what researchers call the Big Five. The 5 traits are openness, how curious and imaginative a person is, how much they embrace new experiences; conscientiousness, how organized, reliable, and disciplined they tend to be; extroversion, how much they gain energy from social interaction; agreeableness, how cooperative, warm, and empathetic they are; and neuroticism, how prone they are to emotional instability, anxiety, and mood swings. Every person sits somewhere on a spectrum for each of these 5 traits, and once you start seeing people through this lens, patterns become visible everywhere. The colleague who's always meticulously organized? High conscientiousness. The friend who seems to love meeting new people at parties but then needs 3 days of solitude to recover? Probably a mix of mild extroversion and high introversion. The family member who reacts to small inconveniences with outsized distress? High neuroticism, which is not a character flaw, but an emotional sensitivity that can be understood and worked with. King also touches on the MBTI, Carl Jung's typology, and the Enneagram, 3 other well-known personality frameworks. Each has its own particular strengths and weaknesses, and none of them perfectly describes any individual human being. The point isn't to slot people into boxes. The point is to have multiple lenses available to you, different ways of asking, what kind of inner world might this person be operating from? Personality frameworks work best when they expand your empathy. When you understand that someone isn't being difficult on purpose, that the way they interact with the world is simply different from yours, it becomes much easier to meet them where they are. Let's be honest. One of the most compelling reasons anyone picks up a book about reading people is to figure out when someone is lying to them. It's a very human desire. We've all been in situations where something felt off and we wished we had a reliable way to know. King handles this topic thoughtfully and with some important honesty. There is no foolproof way to catch a liar. Anyone who tells you there is probably selling something. Research consistently shows that even trained professionals, including law enforcement officers, do only slightly better than chance at detecting deception. The body language tells you've seen in popular culture, looking up and to the left, touching the nose, avoiding eye contact, are far less reliable than their reputations suggest. That said, there are useful approaches. The most effective method is to establish a baseline first. Before you try to read someone's stress signals, you need to know how they normally behave. Do they make a lot of eye contact naturally? Do they tend to gesture a lot? Are they someone who laughs nervously in general? You can only recognize deviation from a pattern if you know the pattern. One research-backed technique is to increase cognitive load. Lying is cognitively demanding. It requires you to construct a story, keep it consistent, manage your own anxiety, and control your body language all at once. Honest recounting is relatively effortless, so anything that adds mental effort to the conversation will tend to widen the gap between a truthful person, who handles it fine, and a deceptive one who starts to show the seams. How do you increase cognitive load? Ask someone to tell you a story in reverse order. Ask unexpected follow-up questions. Return to a detail you already covered and ask them to expand on it. An honest person can do all of this without significant difficulty. Someone who's fabricating a story tends to stumble. Another technique is watching for inconsistencies, not just in what someone says, but between what they say and how they say it. If someone is verbally calm, but their voice pitch has risen, their blink rate has increased, and their usual expressiveness has gone flat, something is off. The inconsistency between verbal content and nonverbal behavior is far more telling than any single cue on its own. Perhaps the most important lie detection skill of all, though, is simply listening very carefully to what people actually say versus what you expect them to say. People who are being honest tend to use natural, spontaneous language with irregular details. People who are constructing a story often use overly smooth language, repeat certain phrases, and leave out details that would naturally be there. King dedicates significant space to something that might be the most underrated skill in this whole book: active, intelligent observation. The concept he introduces is called thin slicing, the ability to draw accurate conclusions from small amounts of information. Research by psychologist Nalini Ambati found that people watching a 3-second clip of a teacher could predict that teacher's end-of-year student evaluations with surprising accuracy. Snap decisions, when made well, are not random. They're drawing on a sophisticated, unconscious pattern recognition system. The key is learning to trust and then refine your initial impressions. Don't dismiss your gut, but don't stop there either. Let your intuition flag something as interesting, and then do the conscious work of figuring out why it flagged it. Observation doesn't just mean watching people in conversation. It means reading the environment they've created for themselves. A person's home tells you an enormous amount. What's on display? What's conspicuously absent? Are there books everywhere, suggesting an intellectual life? Family photographs showing relational priority? Awards on the wall, suggesting someone who values achievement and recognition. An immaculate, sparse space that suggests a need for control or a person still finding their identity. Even someone's car, their email inbox, the way they dress, what they spend money on and what they won't. All of it is data, not definitive proof of anything, but data. Pieces of a puzzle that, assembled over time, begin to reveal the shape of a person. One of the most practical and immediately applicable sections of the book is about using smart questions to get people to reveal themselves naturally. The trick is to ask indirect questions. Questions that sound casual or playful, but whose answers contain a remarkable amount of information. Here's an example. Ask someone what they would do if they won the lottery and could choose how to spend their time from that day forward. Their answer, whether it's travel or time with family or building a business or pure leisure, tells you what they actually value, which is often quite different from what they say they value. Ask someone what animal best describes them. It sounds like a silly party question, but people will often answer it with surprising honesty because the metaphorical distance of talking about an animal makes them feel safe being candid. The person who immediately says, "A wolf, I work best alone and I protect the people I care about," has just told you something very real about how they see themselves and what they need. Ask someone about their most meaningful achievement and their most significant failure. The first will tell you what they're proud of and what they value in themselves. The second will tell you what they're afraid of and what still hurts. Ask what they would save from a house fire. The impulsive answer, before they have time to calculate what sounds good, is usually deeply true. The person who says, "my dog," without hesitation is telling you that living things matter more to them than objects. The person who reaches for their laptop is telling you that their work is tied to their identity. And pay attention to the emotion behind the answer, not just the answer itself. Two people can both say, "I'd save my journals," and mean completely different things by it. One is trying to preserve memory. The other is protecting a private creative life they've never shown anyone. The why matters as much as the what. We live so much of our lives digitally now that any book about reading people has to grapple with what we can learn from online behavior. Research suggests that people are actually more honest on social media than we might expect. The identity someone presents online tends to reflect their actual personality rather than a pure fantasy of who they wish they were, though the picture is never complete. Simple things tell you a lot. When does someone email or text you? A consistent pattern of late-night communication tells you something about their rhythms and possibly their emotional state during those hours. What emotions do their social media posts tend to convey? Are they typically positive and outward-facing, or more neutral, introspective, or negative? How they portray themselves to the world, even digitally, is a reflection of what they value and how they want to be seen. In workplace settings, King notes that a handshake can reveal a surprising amount, not about whether someone is honest, but about how they approach social dynamics. A limp, disengaged handshake suggests low energy or disinterest. An overly firm grip with the hand angled to be on top often suggests someone who wants to establish dominance. A warm, even, comfortable handshake is generally a positive sign. More practically, if you want to understand a potential colleague or employee, their social media profile, handled carefully and ethically, can be more revealing than a polished resume. Research by Don Klemper found that strangers who assessed social media profiles were able to predict future job performance with reasonable accuracy because the traits we project to the world, conscientiousness, openness, agreeableness, actually do show up in the quality of our work. If anything in today's summary resonated with you, if even one idea made you see someone in your life a little differently, I genuinely encourage you to pick up the full book. Read People Like a Book by Patrick King goes so much deeper than we could today. If you found value in this video, please give it a like, share it with someone who'd appreciate it, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. It truly means everything. See you soon.